next speaker is one of my oldest chums, and I could wax eloquent and get tearful about it. But I'll simply introduce him by, well, calling him up here. He's Robert Lantos. We were discussing what he might do, and he offered me a choice. He said, I can either tell people why I make movies, or I can discuss my sex life, he said, and since my sex life probably involves some portion of your sex life, I said, do the first. Robert?
Well, that thought occurred to me because I figured you're paying $3,000, you may want to hear something juicier than why I make movies or how I make them. But Moses, I think, your memory must be hazy, because if you had sharp recollections, you wouldn't have said what you just said. So, I'm going to be kind and gentle to both of us and skip it. And that brings me back to film, which is pretty much the only other idea that I had. And so I thought long and hard about, I've spent my whole life making films. What do I talk about in 20 minutes? It takes me more than 20 minutes to make a phone call. So I thought I couldn't figure it out. And I asked Moses for help, and he wasn't really much help either. And so I was away this past weekend. I was in northern British Columbia fishing for Chinook, giant salmon. And while I was in a boat, with the rod in my hand, I realized I better think of what I'm going to talk about. And this, the salmon gave me an idea. They are, they're the most noble of fish, and I realized I have something in common with them. Not necessarily nobility, but the fact that their life cycle involves swimming upstream. And that's been pretty much the story of my career. In fact, even preceding my career, my family and I were immigrants in Canada. Usually immigrants choose conventional and safe careers. They become lawyers, doctors, engineers, useful professions. And I rejected the idea of a useful profession when I was very young, and I studied English and film. And that kind of, because what turned me on was maybe not so much doing film as much as doing what others were not doing. And that sort of, not consciously, but became the philosophy of my whole career, swimming upstream. Pretty much the first film that I produced, which was called In Praise of Older Women, co-starring Moses Lady, Marilyn Lightstone. We have all sorts of bonds, in her first love scene on film. This film was very successful, and as a result, Warner Brothers picked up distribution rights to it, and I found myself being invited to move to Hollywood and set up shop on the Warner Brothers lot and become a Hollywood studio producer. And I didn't want to do that. And the reason I didn't want to do that is because it seemed that it's what everybody else would do. It was the well-tread path. It is in the Canadian film industry. Back then, it's somewhat different today, thankfully, but back then anybody who even had managed to get a phone call returned by somebody in LA would take the next flight and apply for a green card. So my path was to not do that. And that led me to become what's known in the industry, in the film industry, an independent producer. An independent producer is really a pseudonym, it's a code word. What it stands for is beggar and hostage. Beggar because you're always looking for money and tapping whoever you think can help, and hostage because once you make your film, you depend on your distributors for that film to actually get seen by people. And so after doing that for a dozen films, I realized that I had an allergy to being a hostage and to being a beggar, and that allergy was so strong that I set about building a strong company that would have resources and its own distribution, its own financing, so that at some point I could stop being a hostage. Doing that, corporate building, on the other hand, sort of took me from upstream into mainstream. And I formed with several partners, Alliance Communications in 1985, and spent the next 13 years corporate building and making films that I love on the side, so to speak. As some of you might know, 2.5 years ago, I got rid of Alliance and sold it, and that has allowed me to comfortably return to where I am comfortable, which is upstream. And so the first film that I've made since selling my company was Sunshine, which is exactly my kind of movie, besides being a story that is personal to me and my family and my ancestors. It's got all the things going for it that somebody who likes to swim upstream enjoys. It's 3 hours long. It's a period piece. It's about 100 years in the history of the assimilation of Hungarian Jews. It has the same actor playing 3 different parts, and it cost $26 million to boot. And that's upstream. And the common wisdom among distributors, and that includes distribution executives who used to work for me and were a division of my company, is to try and focus on for films to repeat each other. Distributors love to have movies that are carbon copies of a film that was successful last year, and are generally terrified of films that break the mold and that are challenging, such as Sunshine. And so when distributors say to me, and as they did on, that they have, including my own staff, that this film is unreleasable, we can't sell it, that has become, at first, when I first heard those words, they were frightening, but I've learned that when they say that, I know I'm on to a good thing. It's like music to my ears. I'll give you a little visual sort of explanation and illustration of what I speak. Could you roll tape?
Jiuji. Montana.
Upijawicz, młodszy tam, Wędzinci.
Mr. Goyajenji. Zuwiwi Chiddanan. Chamindo, Lipachti Shukanan. Chamindo, Mswaka de Baimiduk.
Chio, Nochna Mantawa.
Ituashishi Moj, Machubi Assisij, and Gomda. Chitachu.
Nimwe.
Quebec Tayo, Ud Chemindon Wall. Mo, Astitich, Astamakuda, Chatich, Yo, Dong Dong Dong. Nastasia Kumps, Yu. Just two daus, biabida, nim the dutch. Vanda, Saroya.
What do you think they're talking about, Father? Yawich.
I don't know.
Machatam.
Us?
Wenjinji.
Saan, Mr. Goit.
Mandahata.
What's this? Christmas tree decorations?
I am Dr. Adam Schorsch, officer of the Hungarian Army.
What's this white exemption rectum on your arm? Where'd you buy it? Jew? How much?
I am the national fencing champion.
What are you?
I am an Olympic gold medalist.
Look at me. Stand up. Stand up. I'm going to teach you what you are. You garbage. You're a stinking Jew. Strip Jew. All your clothes. All your clothes off! I'm asking you again, Jew. What are you?
Adam Schorsch, Doctor of Law, officer of the Hungarian Army.
What are you, Jew?
Adam Schorsch, Hungary's fencing champion, Olympic gold medalist.
Something must be wrong with my ears. What do you think you are, Jew?
Adam Schorsch, Hungary's fencing champion, Olympic gold medalist. 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 Adam Schorsch, Hungary's fencing champion, Olympic gold medalist.
Hang him on the tree.
Both these films, when they were first seen by distributors, were deemed unreleasable. They were unreleasable because they were different, because they were going places where other films hadn't gone before, and because there was nothing that they could compare them to which would allow for them to be an easy sell. And that, fortunately, the pundits have been proven wrong, and both films have been successful. But that's pretty much, if I had to find a common theme in most of my films, that would be it. I think of Joshua Then and Now, which was a film about the clash of races and cultures in Montreal, or The Sweet Hereafter, which is about a bus full of children that die in a tragic accident, or Crash, which is about extremely kinky behavior by people in a desensitized society. Or Black Robe, which it's about the origins of this country when Europeans and indigenous people first meet in 17th century Quebec. Or films that I'm making now, Ararat, which is Adam Egoyan is directing, which is shooting right now, which is about the genocide of the Armenian people in 1915. Or Men with Brooms, which just finished shooting, and it's about 4 guys who sweep rocks on ice. and you just see the spin-off possibilities on these films, the theme park rides, all the sequels, the tie-ins with Burger King, the action toys, you know, the animated series. That's, you know, Armenians, Hungarians, Algonquin, and sweepers. It doesn't get a lot more upstream than that. But for me, the only prize that is really worth claiming, that's worth going into the water and swimming for, is the one is to prove the pundits wrong, to prove that what common wisdom says cannot be done, can in fact be done. For me, that's what's worth doing when it comes to making films. And that's pretty much heresy in a world that is dominated by Hollywood blockbusters. The way of making films in Hollywood is usually films are one-line ideas. It's called high concept, and they're designed and not written. They're specifically designed for the broadest possible demographics, and that in turn is backed by a worldwide, global marketing juggernaut. You know the movies I'm talking about, they're the top grossing films every year. They will usually have something to do with aliens who invade the earth, which at the last possible minute is saved by, say, the President of the United States, or scaring the daylight out of teenagers in some new way or other, or some giant wave that swallows up a fishing boat. They are generally about pyrotechnics and special effects and everything else like character and meaning and dialogue and substance is just stuff that gets in the way and is more and more swept aside, particularly as the cost of making these movies, and they are the movies that occupy most of the screens currently in our local cineplexes and multiplexes. The cost of making them is now running at well over $100 million a piece, that's US dollars, and the cost of marketing them is another $100 million and change. And because of that, they're like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They only work if, in fact, the largest possible audience does show up. They have a single purpose, these movies, and it's to make money. I'm not judgmental about making money. In fact, you know, I quite like money, but there are all sorts of ways of making money, and to me, making movies has to be about more than just that. I think I think real estate or selling stock could be about just making money, but not making movies. For me, making movies has to do with creating stories that touch and move people and that inform people's lives. And it's, of course, paramount to do that and to find an audience to come and see these movies at the same time. But I'm not interested in the biggest possible audience, because by going after the biggest possible audience every time, what Hollywood is accomplishing is it is essentially gradually wiping out the plurality of choice, in that there's less and less shelf space for films that are not about scaring teenagers and not about the aliens invading the earth. And as you go after the broadest possible audience, you sacrifice films that would be of interest to a smaller audience. I think making films has to be about putting storytelling skills to some good use, and in addition to making money to the bottom line. And so, for me, the satisfaction comes when people say, after seeing Black Robe, that they now have a new perspective on the history of their country, that new light has been shed in some way on the clash of indigenous population with the European population. Or when my own Canadian-born teenagers who barely knew their grandfather and who don't speak a word of Hungarian say thank you to me after screening Sunshine, because it has allowed them to understand where their grandparents and their family comes from. And for me, that's the kind of satisfaction that money can't buy. Thank you very much.